Greetings, I am Andre Lucas Polidoro. I'm a dual major in art history and computer science at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and welcome to the evolution of narrative mechanics in Japanese video games. We have a lot to cover today, so let's begin with some preliminary info. We will be covering a chronological history of Japanese developed video games. I picked Japan due in part to my academic focus on Japanese art history, and secondly, due to Nintendo's unique 98% market share of the entire industry by the mid to late 80s. This near monopoly forced the gaming industry to shift focus away from the public arcades and towards the private home. My goal with this presentation is to emphasize the depth of influence pre-existing media and culture had on this transition, and I further want to contextualize video games as an influential force in the current decade. So let's define the window of analysis. The year 1980 gave us Pac-Man, the quintessential arcade game. In this footage, we see simple saturated colors, attention-grabbing sounds, and one single challenge meant to be repeated at increasing difficulty. Over 30 years later, we have The Last of Us, a decidedly not Japanese-developed game. Here we can see voice-acted dialogue, contextual interactions, a camera system that points right above the shoulder of the player character, and a directed gameplay experience that develops over an overarching plot. Games within this 30-year region are developed similarly to films. They're a multi-person production with strict budgets and deadlines, so the tech hosting these projects were always cheap, consumer-grade technologies. The specific details can get a little headache-inducing, but for the sake of context, we're going to define the minimum, with Pac-Man fitted with an 8-bit Z-Log Z80 processor, and the arcade machine itself fixed with 2 kilobytes of RAM. And for the high end, we're going to look at the PS3's 64-bit Cell processor, sporting over 256,000 times more memory than Pac-Man. This machine looks like a supercomputer compared to the arcades of the 80s. This disparity in tech is a core detail that enables this shift in gameplay direction, but it's also due to actual direction. So the story of early narrative-based games in Japan begin with Hori Yuji, a fan of Western RPGs and point-and-click adventure games on the computer. He was also an editor and columnist for Weekly Shonen Jump, a Japanese comics publication hereby referred to as manga. He started a solo project called Portopia Serial Murder Case in 1983, which turned out to be the first visual novel game in history. And his software experience would then land him a job with the publishing company Enix. And with Enix, Hori Yuji develops a historic game called Dragon Quest in 1986 for the Nintendo Family Computer. Using his connections at Shonen Jump, he hires the historically popular Toriyama Akira of Dragon Ball fame to do the artwork and enemy design for the game. Furthermore, Enix publishes advertising for Dracque in weekly Shonen Jump issues, creating audience overlap between young manga readers and young gamers. Returning to the arcades, about a decade after Pac-Man, Ninja Gaiden hits the scene with a slick Motorola M68000 16-bit processor. This allows for more complex animations than its predecessors, and you can even see that Pac-Man's Z80 is repurposed as a sound chip in the machine to allow sound effects and music to play simultaneously in the game. However, due to 98% market share things, Ninja Gaiden has a simultaneous home release on the Famicom, forcing the game back onto 8-bit hardware at exchange for higher profits. The game was reimagined to be a bit more like Mario, and since the Famicom didn't have that same power for complex animations, Ninja Gaiden developers opted to convey the story of the game as a series of narrated, manga-style panels, capturing that well-understood manga audience. Jumping ahead a bit, around the mid-90s came the shift to 3D gaming, and with it the creation of the game camera. The adoption of this camera led to the desire for more cinematic direction in games, such as the high fantasy adventure Ocarina of Time. Developers at Nintendo wanted to express fantasy sword fighting, so they looked towards Samurai Street performances for inspiration, such as this video at Toei Studios. The hero here is dressed in blue and stands at the center of a combat circle. Other actors take turns attacking according to a script to elicit the idea of an intense combat scenario. And the Nintendo developers adopted that same format in Ocarina of Time for its enemy design. Here you can see the skeleton circling around the player character, and in the background you can see another enemy waiting its turn to not interrupt the flow of combat. Right at the turn of the millennium, the PlayStation hosts Boku no Natsuyasumi, also known as My Summer Vacation. This game ditches ninjas and heroes to instead express a feeling of being a young boy, fishing, catching bugs, and exploring Japan during their summer vacation. The camera in this game is static, at curated angles, and the CD format enables the recording of cicada chirps and running rivers to permeate the play space instead of synthesized sound effects through computer chips like old games. A mere 5 years after Boku no Natsuyasumi, Resident Evil 4 debuts on the GameCube. This game was a zombie action thriller, and the increased graphical fidelity led the team at Capcom to creating this revolutionary over-the-shoulder camera perspective to enhance tension. This decision was revolutionary and would be adopted by many modern games, including 10 years after this with The Last of Us, bringing us all the way back. So, The Last of Us, inspired by Resident Evil 4, developed in Santa Monica, not Japan, and also in 2023 adapted to an HBO television drama. A television drama which saw ratings, which was the second highest debut in the last decade on HBO, sporting numbers that HBO hasn't seen since Boardwalk Empire in 2010. So this serves as a clear example of Japanese game influence finding its way into pop culture all the way here in the United States through other mediums. But there's more. At the beginning of November, for context, this presentation is on November 21st, and this happened on November 4th. At the beginning of November 2025, Horiyuji received the Orders of the Rising Sun honors from the Japanese government. This is a prestigious award recognizing people with positive social impact, and Horiyuji is the first video game developer to receive this award, further cementing video gaming's impact literally as it's being felt. This is my sincere expression to keep looking at this burgeoning medium, because what I've shown today is just the very tippy top of the iceberg, and there is a lot more to uncover. Thank you.